Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, February the 9th, 2021. I'm not going to spend too much time on President Trump's second impeachment because it is a pitiful farce. But let's see. Today, the Senate voted 56-44 that the second impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump is constitutional. This is from Craig Kaplan on Twitter. He's with C-SPAN. 6 Republican senators voted yes, with all Democrats: Cassidy of Louisiana, Collins of Maine, Murkowski of Alaska, Romney, there's a surprise, of Utah, Sass, there's a surprise again, of Nebraska, and Toomey of Pennsylvania. Yeah, okay. With all of the problems that the United States is facing now, and the fact that Orange Bad Man is no longer in the White House, one would have thought that this exciting new Biden administration would have better things to do than to impeach a president who is no longer in office. But I've been talking about elites with regard to James Burnham's The Machiavellians. And Burnham makes the point where the elites often reach a point where they are no longer fit for purpose. And clearly the American elite is no longer fit for purpose. I want to talk about the subject of ingratitude next, specifically with regard to a woman called Virginia Heffernan. According to Wikipedia, she was born in 1969. She's an American journalist and cultural critic. Since 2015, she has been a political columnist at the LA Times and a cultural columnist at Wired. From 2003 to 2011, she worked as a staff writer for the New York Times, first as a television critic, then as a magazine columnist, and then as an opinion writer. She was born in Hanover, New Hampshire. And I guess wherever it is she's living now, there is a lot of snow there. Curiously, it turns out that Heffernan does not believe in the theory of evolution. She has called herself a creationist. By that, she means that she believes in God's role in the creation of the earth, which makes her interesting. But she has been in the news because she doesn't like her neighbors. This is from Pooja Salvi at, is this site actually called Meow or something like that? This week, LA Times columnist Virginia Heffernan was at the receiving end of a lot of flack on social media as one of her recent articles for the publication became viral for all the wrong reasons. Heffernan is being tagged hateful names on Twitter. Oh dear. From an elitist asshole to a divisive person to straight up abuses. In her latest article for the publication, Heffernan recounted a personal experience with her pro-Trump neighbors, boo, who helped plow her driveway following a snowstorm without her asking for it. Yes, one can see how that is a conundrum. I mean, a serious problem. Your neighbors do something for you without being asked, and you are put out by this because, well, they voted for Donald Trump. How can you deal with that? According to Harriet Alexander at the Daily Mail, the Brooklyn-based author, there's a surprise, wrote in Friday's paper that the Trumpites next door to their pandemic gateway in upstate New York had plowed her drive after a snowstorm. And she makes a great deal in this piece for the LA Times about people doing kind things for their own people. And of course, everyone is jumping down her throat, and it's quite deserved. But I wanted to talk about this question of like to like. She writes, how am I going to resist demands for unity in the face of this act of aggressive niceness? Of course, on some level, I realize I owe them thanks, and man, it really looks like the guy backdragged the driveway like a pro, but how much thanks? These neighbors are staunch partisans of blue lives, and there aren't a lot of anything other than white lives in the neighborhood. So why are you there, Virginia Heffernan? Do you feel somehow more secure, perhaps more safer, more part of a community if the people in it resemble you? I don't think these are questions that she has actually considered. She continues, this is also kind of weird. Back in the city, people don't sweep other people's walkways for nothing. Maybe it's like what Eddie Murphy discovered in that old Saturday Night Live sketch, White Like Me. He goes undercover in white makeup and finds that when white people are among their own, they pop free champagne and live the high life. As Murphy puts it, slowly I began to realize that when white people are alone, they give things to each other for free. And, well, okay, next, bam, Hezbollah, here we go. The Shiite Islamist political party in Lebanon also gives things away for free. The favors Hezbollah does for people in the cities Tyre and Sidon probably don't involve snowplows, but like other mafias, Hezbollah tends to its own. The Shiite, sick, elderly, and hungry. They offer protection and hospitality and win loyalty that way. And they also demand devotion to their brutal us versus them anti-Sunni cause. Some of us are family, the favors say, the rest are infidels. And here we go again with another uppercut. The same is true with Louis Farrakhan, who currently helms the Nation of Islam. When the Southern Poverty Law Center classifies him as a dangerous anti-Semite, much of his flock says he's just a little screwy and unfailingly magnanimous to them. When someone helps you when you're down or snowed in, it's almost impossible to regard them as a blight on the world. In fact, you're more likely to be overwhelmed with gratitude and convinced of the person's inherent goodness. And here we go again, another uppercut. You might end up like the upper middle class family I stayed with in France as a teenager. They did not attend a citywide celebration for the 100th birthday of Charles de Gaulle, the war hero who orchestrated the liberation of his country from Nazi Germany in 1944. That's not exactly true. Charles de Gaulle was a hero, no question about it. And the Allies did allow him to enter Paris first. But no, it was not the Free French Army that was primarily responsible for the liberation of France in 1944. Back to Heffernan. This family did have several portraits of Philippe Pétain, Nazi collaborator, on their wall. When I screwed up the courage to ask how it was for them during the occupation, the lady of the house replied, "We were happy because the Nazis were very police." I did not know the words, so I excused myself to consult a French-English dictionary. I was in tears when I found the entry polite. So when I accept generosity from my pandemic neighbors, acknowledging the legitimate kindness with a wave or a plate of cookies, am I also sealing us in as fellow travelers who are very polite to each other, but not so much to them? Yes, and I can see how Trump voters are exactly like the French collaborationists of World War II. Trump supporters during the 4 years when Trump was president, as we know, was busily rounding up Jews across America and sending them to death camps in Germany or something like that. Heffernan writes, loving your neighbor is evidently much easier when your neighborhood is full of people just like you. Yes, it is. And why does Virginia Heffernan, how could she possibly be surprised by this? I will say, though, in terms of charity in the United States, in terms of charities that white people subscribe to, they are far more likely to give to others who do not look like them than other people in the United States. This evidence is easily found, and I'm sure Virginia Heffernan knows it herself. She continues, what do we know about the Trumpites around us, like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who spoke eloquently this week about her terrifying experience during the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. Americans are expected to forgive and forget before we've even stitched up our wounds. Oh, did AOC suffer any wounds on that terrifying day of January 6th? Psychic wounds, of course. She is now twice a survivor. We must never forget that, and she will never let us forget it. Or gotten our vaccines against the pandemic that former President Trump utterly failed to mitigate. Oh, okay. You've heard me before and my opposition to this warp speed development of vaccines, because I do not think that it is safe. And I think there's a problem with the vaccines being efficacious. But who was it that started the warp speed program for vaccines in the United States? Why, that would be Donald J. Trump. Who's responsible for lockdowns or the lack of lockdowns in the United States? Why, that would be mayors, governors, county officials, and the like. Would it not? Not the President of the United States. But Heffernan continues, my neighbor supported a man who showed near murderous contempt for the majority of Americans. They kept him in business with their support, but the plowing. Oh, I like that little Hillary Clinton touch there. On January 6th, after the insurrection, Senator Ben Sasse issued an aw shucks plea for all Americans to love their neighbors. The United States, he said, isn't Hatfields and McCoys. This blood feud forever. And he added, you can't hate someone who shovels your driveway. At the time, I seethed. The Capitol had just been desecrated. Oh, so when American flags are burned routinely by people who support BLM and or Antifa, is this a desecration? Somehow I don't believe that Virginia Heffernan believes that herself. So here's my response to my plowed driveway for now. Politely, but not profusely, I'll acknowledge the Sassian move with a wave and a thanks, a minimal start on building back trust. I'm not ready to knock on the door with a covered dish yet. And I'm sure that they are all very much put out about that, because Virginia Heffernan's cookies, well, her brownies in particular, are renowned throughout New York State. She concludes, I also can't give my neighbors absolution. It's not mine to give, so why are you bringing it up? Free driveway work, as nice as it is just not the same currency as justice and truth. To pretend it would be to lie, and they probably aren't looking for absolution anyway. Yes, exactly. But I can offer a standing invitation to make amends, not with a snowplow, but by recognizing the truth about the Trump administration, and more important, by working for justice for all those whom the administration harmed. Only when we work shoulder to shoulder to repair the damage of the last 4 years will we even begin to dig out of this storm. Yes, and I'm sure Virginia Heffernan is going to be working shoulder to shoulder amongst the people that she despises. Again, why does this woman live where she does? And I suggested earlier, there's very good reasons. Scratch a liberal, and one typically finds someone who lives in a white-topia. But cognitive dissonance is the coin of their realm. And I suppose it's no good pointing that out to them. I suppose it is sufficient that we know that they're hypocrites, liars, and phonies. Speaking about ingratitude, there is a woman called Gabriella Coleman, who is an author. And she wrote a book a few years ago called Hacker, Hoaxer, Whistleblower, Spy, The Many Faces of Anonymous. And, well, I had a feeling she was going after someone in particular when she wrote this on Twitter. Pro tip for authors: before you ask someone to blurb your book, ask yourself, are they susceptible in any way to red pilling? If you answer yes, don't follow through with the request. Now, why would she write this? Well, because there is a blurb on the front cover of this book by, Glenn Greenwald. And the blurb says, essential reading. So that is to say that this woman, Gabrielle Coleman, asked a favor from Glenn Greenwald. Well, why would she ask him? Well, because he's much more famous than she is. And of course, he is associated with the question of government surveillance. And so Glenn Greenwald kindly acceded to her request. And now she is backing away like crazy. Why? Why would that be? Oh, because it turns out that Glenn Greenwald, despite being a homosexual, is not woke. He's just not woke. And he has taken aim at journalists who act as hall monitors, who seek to suppress free speech and to punish all those who venture off the reservation. Let's have a look at the chat. Thank you, Roulette Crat. Hello, Palcaso 88. Metal Mike says, so the Senate decides what is constitutional. This is typical in these sort of things, that bodies will determine what is constitutional, and I suppose, oh yeah, take it to court if you don't like it. Jay Miller says Doug Heffernan is better than Virginia Heffernan. Yes, a King of Queens reference, perhaps the first on this live stream. But he says, hello, Kevin, have you seen Some Girls with a Young Jennifer Connelly set and filmed in Quebec? Review, maybe. I don't believe that I have. Chokokin666 says that Hezbollah are non-sectarian heroes. Okay, all right. Jonathan Ferguson says Farrakhan has a lot of hot takes. I remember some years ago being genuinely astonished when Louis Farrakhan, who was, I believe, a violin virtuoso when he was a youth, has kept up his violin playing, performed Felix Mendelssohn's violin concerto, and he said that he did this in order to demonstrate that he did not hate Jews. Well, Mendelssohn was Jewish racially, if you like, but he was a Christian, a Lutheran, as his father was. His music was banned during the Third Reich, although Karajan played it during the Nazi regime. But it was just a strange thing to do. You see, I've demonstrated my bona fides here. Listen to me play Mendelssohn. Steve says, this op-ed is so strange, I can't tell if it's serious parody or mental illness. Again, Jonathan Ferguson, our enemies are evil, and it's becoming clear that no one is going to stop them. Well, I think that the effect, or one of the effects of this second impeachment, your Trump impeachment 2 electric boogaloo, is to harden the hearts of a great many Trump supporters. Joe Biden's in the White House. Shouldn't you be celebrating that? You now control the presidency, House of Representatives, and the Senate. Is that not enough for you? No, it is not enough for them. Nowhere even close. Chokakan 666, the absolute certainty that they're absolutely correct is frightening. I trust that people maintain some general intellectual agnosticism. I don't know. I would say no. And for the reason that I don't know that this word intellectual is appropriate, because it's visceral. It's visceral mimesis that we see with this Gabriella Coleman woman, that she might think, oh, Glenn Greenwald seems to have evolved in his political opinions over the last few years, and she may disagree with the latest iteration of them, but one would think that she would still be grateful from this promotion of her book. No, she is not. She is frightened. And she is looking to, she wants everyone to know I'm not like that guy. Steve says Glenn Greenwald is like the last buffalo, an honest liberal. Roulette Crack says 2021 is like the movie Scanners, lots of exploding heads as reality fails to cooperate with their delusion. Head McNeck says maybe Farrakhan was making a statement about the propensity for people in the public eye to trip over themselves, showing how not anti-Semitic they are. I don't think there's any question that Louis Farrakhan hates Jews. I mean, he's made it quite clear over the years, but the liberals are in a difficult situation with him because of his support in the black community. And so, well, simply because he is black. Jesse Jackson, referred to Hymietown, speaking of New York City. And we know the Reverend Al Sharpton actually promulgated, honest to God, pogroms in New York City. But every year, leading Democrats go to kiss his ring. Oh, yes. Speaking about the insurrection on January 6th, this is from the Washington Post. Navy veteran Thomas Edward Caldwell led a band of Oath Keepers extremist group to Washington January 6th to storm the U.S. Capitol, federal prosecutors allege, helping to mastermind a violent plot to stop lawmakers from certifying Joe Biden's presidential victory. But Caldwell's attorney, Thomas Plofchen, says he isn't just a retired lieutenant commander. He also had a top secret security clearance and served as a section chief for the FBI after leaving the armed forces in 2009. Those details were revealed in a motion filed yesterday asking a judge to release Caldwell from custody, citing his long military career and ability to pass vetting for the high security clearance. His attorney also said that Caldwell has disabilities from his military service that would have prevented him from storming the Capitol. The FBI did not immediately return an inquiry late Monday about Caldwell's past employment status. Caldwell's filing, which says he was paid as a GS-12, does not explain how he could have served as an FBI section chief while also being classified as a significantly lower federal pay scale than typically comes with such a position. The claims about Caldwell's high security clearance and FBI service add to concerns about extremism in the military and law enforcement. Oh, that's one way of looking at it. I would look at it a slightly different way, which is it's feds all the way down. We found out that the leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique, as he styles himself, Tarrio, is a Fed as well. So, I suppose the question is, how many people involved in this are not Feds? Here's an update on the green energy revolution. Everyone is going to get a high-paying union job. Yeah. And that's going to be done how? Do you remember when Obama became president, all this talk about shovels in the ground, shovel-ready projects? It turns out there were precious few of them. This is from James Gordon at the Daily Mail. White House Press Secretary Jen, not Jennifer, mind you, Jen Psaki, appeared to openly mock a reporter who questioned the Biden administration's decision to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline on Monday. Some 11,000 potential jobs will be shelved following the president's decision to halt construction of the pipeline that was supposed to carry oil from Canada to Texas. The decision immediately left 1,000 people working on the pipeline in South Dakota on unemployment, but Biden promised those affected would get green jobs. Where is it that they can go for their green job? Peter Ducey, a reporter with Fox News, asked Psaki during Monday's afternoon press secretary. That is something the administration has promised, and there is now a gap, so I'm just curious when that happens, when those people can count on that. Psaki responded, Well, I'd certainly welcome you to present your data of all the thousands and thousands of people who won't be getting a green job. Maybe next time you're here, you can present that. She really does talk like that. Ducey didn't let up, but you said they will be getting green jobs. I'm just asking when that happens. Yes. TBD, as they say. Psaki batted away the criticism and promised that Biden would be forthcoming with a jobs plan in the coming weeks. He has every plan to share more details on that plan in the weeks ahead. Well, that is good to know. Last month, the Biden administration unveiled its $2 trillion Green New Deal fueled environmental plan, which bold moves. This is from the Mail. It's not me making that error. Include eliminating coal, oil, and natural gas as sources of electricity by 2035. Oh, this is going to be fun. But it hasn't gone without hiccups. Biden's climate czar, dread word, John Kerry, was deemed to be out of touch by Republicans after suggesting coal workers impacted by climate change efforts could go to work to make the solar panels. Okay, so essentially, this move, the Green New Deal, if it ever happens, you need parallel systems working at the same time. Because, there's claims that, yes, coal, oil, and natural gas will be removed as sources of electricity by 2035. But in the meantime, they are still the sources of electricity. So meanwhile, this enormous new infrastructure must be created from scratch. And I will point out there is no evidence that anything such like a Green New Deal energy system will work at scale. No evidence at all. They've already had significant problems with electricity generation in Britain because of this. So on the one hand, the old system is going to keep going, and there's going to be a parallel system built up alongside it. And how much money is that going to cost? Never mind the fact that we learned that solar panels are made out of quartz and, wait for it, coal. Yes, that's right. That's right. I mean, these people who drive Teslas believe that, I don't know, the energy that powers their cars comes from lightning. Do they believe that? Perhaps. A recent video I saw after the president of GM rather elided over the question of where the electricity comes from for a GM's electric car, a local energy man said, right here, it's 95% coal. Okay. Claudia Conway is in the news again. And don't you need your parents' permission to appear on American Idol if you're 16 years old? Or are Claudia Conway's parents so afraid of her that she can essentially do whatever she likes, notwithstanding this suspicion that a nude picture of her was placed on her mother's phone for a Twitter app that she almost certainly had never heard of, that her mother did that, which would have been a very, very serious crime. But according to the authoritative TMZ, the folks at American Idol know gold fell in their laps when Claudia Conway auditioned, and they are very wisely milking it even before the season begins. Kelly Conway's headline-grabbing teen got the front and center tease treatment Monday night in a new trailer for the upcoming AI season on ABC, and they didn't pussyfoot with the big name they had in their midst. Claudia's appearance was cut as its own TV spot. You hear Ryan Seacrest talking about how she's a social media sensation. Perhaps more importantly, she's the kid of two very famous political figures, which CC herself alludes to on camera. Yeah, okay. This story doesn't have anything to do with the recent controversies, her and TikTok. And judging by the pictures that I'm seeing here, this woman is where this 16-year-old is she needs some makeup tips. She seems to try to turn herself into Ariana Grande. Not a wise move. This story is not going to have a happy ending, but I guess we're going to be forced to endure all of it, because the media likes nothing better than breaking people for our sick amusement. Let's go back to the chat, see if there's anything going on there. American Idol news. What is this, TMZ? Well, I mean, it's American Idol news. It is political news as well. Let's see. Electricity is magical, says Dionysus. That's what we are told by the MSN. Regardless, he is someone who is controlled by the FBI, says Metal Mike. Roulette Crack says we were promised jetpacks and we are getting bug burgers. Head McNick, he was talking about Terrio here. He was a small-time crook trying to avoid prison. Slimy guy, still not a Fed. Okay, I don't trust anyone who has ever been compromised in this way. If Enrique is a Fed, then Soros is a Nazi. Both statements are lazy and below people who don't deal in strawman. I've never referred to George Soros as a Nazi. And I can only imagine the horror of the situation that he found himself in Budapest in 1944. But no, again, I simply do not trust anyone who has acted as a police informant who is associated with a so-called extremist political movement. Headman X says the phrase Muslims are right about women is the quickest way to give leftists an immediate aneurysm. Okay, I'm going to talk about Seth Rogen now. And he appears to become a major political figure for reasons that are beyond me. If you don't know about Seth Rogen, he is the Los Angeles born but Vancouver raised funny man who specializes in dire stoner comedies. Oh, and he made a movie about various types of food having sex with each other, which when I read about this, I thought, no, Hollywood isn't going to go that far. No, but it happened. This is from Bounding into Comics. Psychologist Gad Saad reported his recent article on Psychology Today regarding the moral hypocrisy of celebrities has been unpublished with no reason given. Saad took to Twitter to share an email he received from Psychology Today informing him that the article had been unpublished. He wrote, "I'm at a loss for words, Psychology Today." The article in question had become one of the most popular on the site in roughly 30 minutes since posting. It was taken down without any explanations. The email he received reads, "The following action has been taken on your blog post, The Moral Hypocrisy of Celebrities Action, blog post unpunished. Reason other. Try harder. Note, this post has been temporarily unpublished and is undergoing editorial review. We will follow up with further information shortly. Thank you for your patience." Yes, I just saw that little stab there at the end. Thank you for your patience. I'm just reminded of a famous line written by Fran Lebowitz decades ago when she saw that highly irritating sign, "Thank you for not smoking." And her response was, "Don't thank me because I'm not going to not smoke." But we moved on quite a bit. From there, Gad Saad was born in 1964, described by Wiki as a Lebanese-Canadian evolutionary psychologist and professor at the John Molson School of Business at Concordia University, that's in Montreal, who is known for applying evolutionary psychology to marketing and consumer behavior. And he is highly accomplished academically. He has a BSc in mathematics and computer science and MBA from McGill in Montreal, and an MS and PhD from Cornell in New York. So does Seth Rogen have some sort of plenary power to censor publications now? You might regard a few years ago, he got himself into a spot of bother when he attacked the movie American Sniper as being, Nazi propaganda or something of the sort. Now, if he had seen the movie or even read the reviews in any detail, the movie is not an endorsement of Americans going around and killing foreigners. It would seem to me that unless you're a psychopath, being a professional killer would be a very difficult thing to do. And if you see the movie, you can see that it is a nuanced treatment. But Seth Rogen does not believe in nuance. He doesn't do that. This piece, unpublished from Psychology Today, has appeared in other places. The Moral Hypocrisy of Celebrities, the Case of Seth Rogen. Back in 2009, I authored an article on this platform titled The Narcissism and Grandiosity of Celebrities. Continuing this tradition, my past week on my social media platforms, I critiqued the virtue signaling that members of the privileged classes engage in. Here is what I wrote. Let me explain yet again the source for all of the platitudinous virtue signaling. The truly privileged elites know that deep down they are frauds. They suffer from existential guilt. Hence, one of the ways in which they assuage the guilt albatross around their necks is to demonstrate to the world that they are truly compassionate, truly loving, truly caring, truly profound. Hence, they all love undocumented immigrants. They love Mother Earth. They love the ozone layer. They love Black Lives Matter. They love socialism. They love inner cities. They hate the gentrification of neighborhoods. They love mentors of color. They cherish diversity. They love alphabet people movies. They adore queer architecture. They are better than you. More caring, more cultured, more empathetic. This permits them to sleep better at night. See, I'm not a fraud. I may be a gargantuan parasitic hedge fund bullshitter, but I really care. I may be an overpaid BS actor, but I fight for solar panels. Those flyover rubes deserve their lot in life. They are racists who bed their siblings. We are science supporters who fight against Mother Earth rapists whilst flying in our private jets. It is a classic ego defensive strategy that permits the ruling class to exist within their fractured selves. Save this thread, memorize it. I'm offering you a deep psychological explanation of our times. Well, Ben Stein wrote a book about this some decades ago. I believe it was called The View from Sunset Boulevard. And of course, Ben Stein has been an academic, and he's also worked as an actor, game show host, producer, etc. He explained it somewhat differently, that people in Hollywood identify with the underdog, or what is classed as the underdog, because of the very great uncertainty in their lives. That most actors cannot make a living at acting, and many people who become successful in acting, they remember the bad days when they waited tables, did other jobs in an attempt to break in the industry, and thought that they would never do so. They remember the times perhaps when they gave great auditions and weren't even considered, or the role went to someone because he or she was related to someone else, or was sleeping with a director or a producer. But even when these people become successful, perhaps they become even more insecure because there's no guarantee that they will remain successful. And of course, you reach a certain level of success, but typically all but a handful of actors, they can't keep this up. They descend in status as they grow older. And of course, this makes them insecure. And so they feel themselves to be underdogs, regardless of, how many thousand square feet their houses are, regardless of how much money they have in the bank, regardless of the free meals that they get at, famous restaurants and the like. This is just ingrained in them that I'm on the side of the underdog. Sad continues. Seth Rogen, who had been tagged on Twitter regarding the latter, retorted as follows: I actually watched your video and it's so stupid. Why was I a left-wing socialist when I was broke and unemployed, according to your brilliant theory? He's not very literate, is he? Sad replied, thanks for watching. Many young people are socialists when they are driven by immature impulses of utopia. Then they grow up. You are a grown man with tons of money. Your current stances are rooted in vacuous, empty signaling, rooted in a desire to belong in Hollywood. It takes zero courage to hold your stances within the entertainment ecosystem. You espouse bullshit rhetoric that wins you points at the cool kids' parties, but you are otherwise as ignorant as my out-of-order toaster. I'd be happy to chat with you on my show, as you actually have a very large platform, and as such, you have the opportunity to actually make a difference. Stop succumbing to the herd mindset. Learn how to think critically. Learn the meaning and implications of socialism versus capitalism. You are among the most privileged people in the history of humanity, and yet you walk around as though you are a Che Guevara revolutionary. You are the product of capitalism. If you are such a socialist, send me some of your money. I'm trying to build an interdisciplinary research institute. Live out your convictions. If you are a socialist, you have no business being the beneficiary of the most capitalist industry in the most capitalist country in the history of humanity. Don't be a hypocritical fraud. Cheers, amigo, unquote. I am certainly no fan of Seth Rogen, but I think that this, you can't be a socialist and work in a capitalist system. Well, Hollywood is a capitalist system, and most of the systems in the West are capitalist, or at the very least mixed. Trotsky said famously, you don't need to believe in the bus company to get to where you want to go. And of course, I am no admirer of Leon Trotsky, but I think what he said there is a truth. That people who are paralyzed by ethical dilemmas will never achieve anything in life. So let's move on here. And so we have some, this New York Times story about the N-word refuses to die. And I'm somewhat pleased that apparently there is some resistance to this reign of terror at that newspaper. This is from Aaron Sabarium at the Washington Free Beacon. The resignation, and resignation is put in scare quotes, of star New York Times science writer Donald McNeil Jr. has sparked a furious back and forth among Times staffers, many of whom are outraged over the Gray Lady's handling of his departure. The Washington Free Beacon reviewed a series of postings to a Facebook group for current and former Times staffers where a tense debate is unfolding over McNeil's exit. One camp argues that his dismissal was justified, and another asserts it set a troubling precedent, which the New York Times union should have done more to prevent. Whatever happened to the notion of worker solidarity, to giving a fellow worker the benefit of the doubt, asked Stephen Greenhouse, who spent 3 decades covering labor issues for the Times. And why didn't the News Guild do far more to defend and protect the job of a longtime Times employee, one who at times did tireless, heroic work on behalf of the Guild to help improve pay and conditions for all New York Times employees? That's a good question from Mr. Greenhouse. McNeil had excoriated management's attempts to freeze pension plans in 2012, calling those involved belligerent idiots. Time crossword columnist Deb Amlin accused Greenhouse of an excessive focus on the perpetrator, arguing that he and others should shift their attention to the people McNeil had harmed. Why is it that the focus in discussions like this is almost always on ruining the perpetrator's life and not those who were harmed by his actions? She reached for comment. Amlin said the Free Beacon is this is a private group, and she would appreciate it if you not use anything I said or wrote. Oh, yes, and the New York Times never does that. The New York Times never takes private communications and publishes them. The back and forth provides a window into the latest racial controversy roiling the paper, which saw a revolt among minority staffers over the summer after publishing an op-ed by Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas. opinion editor, James Bennett, ultimately lost his job. McNeil's ouster came nearly 2 years after the incident that precipitated it. While chaperoning high school students on a pricey trip to Peru, the science reporter responded to a question from a student about whether one of her classmates should have been suspended for using the N-word. In the process, he uttered the offending syllables himself. An Eternal Times investigation found his judgment wanting, but stopped short of firing him. There's a lesson here. Don't chaperone high school students, because they're going to be looking for any excuse to ruin you. Only after the Daily Beast published an account of the incident, thrusting into the public realm for the first time, was McNeil pushed out. We do not tolerate racist language regardless of intent, Dean Baquet, the paper's executive editor, told staff in an email. Oh, this could be a big problem for the Times, isn't it? I mean, they're going to, if you look at reviews of books, I guess so much is going to have to be omitted, or perhaps it would just be better not to review books about history, or any books about, biography even, or perhaps just stop reviewing books entirely, because there's so many dangerous things there. Even in ironic or self-mocking quotations about a speaker's own group in rap lyrics, for example, their use erodes the worthy inhibition against brutality in public discourse. Danielle Rhodes Ha told the Free Beacon. She declined to say if that policy extends to social media, where other New York Times writers, including Nicole Hannah-Jones and Asted Herndon, have quoted the slur. Oh dear, oh dear. For younger listeners, there was a time, I would say in the 1980s and the 1990s, where there was a resistance among white people and quite a lot of black people as well against the use of the N-word and, how shall we say, persistent misogyny in rap lyrics, and that they just got steamrollered. This is an authentic expression of black culture, and who are you to say that these people should not be saying these things? And if you're a black person saying this, well, you're not a real black person, or you're old or irrelevant. And I'm looking at a tweet from Ida Bay Wells, or Nicole Hannah-Jones, from May the 2nd, 2016. Oh, there's that word. All 6 letters of it. And here's another one from the same day from Ida Bay Wells, aka Nicole Hannah-Jones. And there is that word again. Oh, both the 5-letter version and the 6-letter version. I'm looking forward to Ida Bay explaining this. Well, actually, there's no possible explanation for it. None possible. Van Jones of CNN, who is a black man, appeared on ABC's The View last Friday. Probably a foolish thing for him to have done. And he was ganged up on because he had had his picture taken with a woman, a black woman, a supporter of Donald Trump. And he had responded positively to Trump's efforts to stop black people in the United States spending so many years in prison. For his pains, he was attacked by a woman called Navarro, Ana Navarro, who is not black. She is a Nicaraguan immigrant to the United States. And she proceeded to instruct him, an American black man, on how American black men should act. That we have found, what performative whiteness is, that's what it's called, that we have been instructed by no less than the Washington Post, that black people and other persons of color who do not display the correct political views are actually white and thus deserving of damnation and proscription, no doubt. There's a piece here on the website conservativewoman.co.uk by Keith Joyce, and pretty much what I'm thinking and have been thinking for a long time now. Have my friends been taken over by aliens, or has everyone been taken over by aliens? He begins, I don't suppose the science fiction writer John Wyndham is much read these days, but in the 50s and 60s, his books were very popular. Recently, one of his plots has been playing on my mind. The Day of the Triffids, 1951, opens with a shower of green meteors over Britain, which draws nearly everyone to watch. Next day, the spectators are all blind, the only ones to escape with their sight being a handful who are unconscious or otherwise unable to see the meteors. I'm starting to wonder if some similar Wyndham-style phenomenon has affected all but a very few of the population, disabling their critical faculties and making them unquestioningly, even gladly, receptive to every word issuing from authority. It is hard otherwise to explain how so many previously sensible people have believed the government propaganda and given it the status of holy writ. The vast majority can personally know no one much under 80 who has died of or with COVID-19, in other words, picked it up in hospital, or even been seriously ill. Sensible people can surely not believe that a piece of cloth or paper can act as a barrier to a virus. It is like using a football net to block sand, but not as efficient. Yet they obediently mask up, even in the open air, even when there is no other person within 100 yards. Something must have taken over their brains. There is no other explanation. I used to work in newspapers, and so did many of my friends and acquaintances. I've known some for decades. It would be hard to find a more cynical bunch, never taking anything from officialdom at face value. Well, that hasn't been true for quite some time, but never mind. He continues, they're quick-witted, humorous, and intelligent, and I like, trust, and respect them. I've assumed we were on the same wavelength. Yet these same friends, to a person, have been suckered into fearing a virus which is dangerous only to a tiny minority, and into believing that they must have a novel type of vaccine in an early experimental stage. Where's the skepticism they always used to show? They seem to have taken leave of their senses. At the end of the Day of the Triffids, a paramilitary faction emerged intending to take control of the remaining sighted people, while a few dissidents establish a community on the Isle of Wight. Maybe I will see you there. Claude Coburn, once quoted here previously, once said, never believe anything until it has been officially denied. And it was true enough that in the past, a great many journalists believed this, or they tended towards that belief. But I would have to say that 10, 20, 30 years now that the establishment newspapers have been in the business of lightly rewriting government press releases. That you see, Paul Johnson said nothing beats news in a newspaper, but there's not much news in the newspaper anymore. Apart from, the features about Claudia Conway and the latest iteration of The Bachelor or The Bachelorette or Love Island or whatever, what you get is meta. Not the story, but the consideration of the story at a different level. Or reporting on polls, or who's up or who's down. Some reporter last week asked Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki about the 2024 caucuses. No, she quite rightly says too soon. But no, let's not talk about the government that's in power now. Government, in the United States, that is, it's a crisis in the United States, economic crisis. Let's not talk about that. That would involve too much hard work. No, let's just talk about the midterms or 2024, because you can write whatever you like about that, and it's not important. There's a piece here by Oliver Hartwich at The Spectator. Why is Jacinda Ardern still so popular? He begins, every time I read another excitable media article about New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, I am reminded of an old quip, viewed from a distance, everything is beautiful. That was Tacitus. Were this Roman intellectual and historian alive today, he would make a great New York Times columnist. His tactic was to spin political and historical analogies so that they could influence public affairs back home. Tacitus's Germania, for example, was about framing the Germanic tribes as a noble culture so that his Roman compatriots would recognize their own society as corrupt and decadent in contrast. The only problem was that Tacitus had never crossed the Rhine. That did not matter much. Most Romans had not traveled far north either. That it is happening again, except this time New Zealanders are the noble savages being lovingly invented by global colonists. Hardly any of these writers actually live in New Zealand or understand it. I will break in to say that hardly of them could have found it on a map before the Lord of the Rings movies. Their op-eds reveal more about them than the country they purport to write about. In normal circumstances, this would not be a problem. But over the past few years, Jacinda Ardern has risen to international stardom. Her rise was based on remote reporting by a progressive world media thirsting for a noble alternative to strongman leaders. Anyone wishing for an anti-Trump, an anti-Johnson, or an anti-Bolsonaro could not dream up a more suitable figure than Ardern. If she did not exist, she would have to be invented. She ticks all the boxes. As a young woman who became prime minister at the age of 37, she is one of the world's first millennial heads of government. She is only the second world leader to give birth in office. Her political tenure is soaked in progressive holy water. The list of her adopted causes is long. She cited child poverty as a reason for entering politics. When she first ran for prime minister in 2017, she declared climate change her, quote, generation's nuclear-free moment, unquote. I don't really know what that is supposed to mean. In early 2019, she promised in the Financial Times to champion a new economics of kindness. This was demonstrated shortly afterwards in the world's first well-being budget. Ardern has become the media's poster child of a modern center-left politician, not least to her expertise in communicating to every audience, whether it is a Facebook live broadcast from her home in her pajamas or a traditional press conference. Ardern oozes a highly personalized brand of warmth, kindness, and empathy. So how is she actually done in office? After the massacre in Christchurch, of course, she posed for several days as a sad Muslim lady. But what else is going on in New Zealand? She wanted to solve New Zealand's housing crisis by building 100,000 homes over a decade. This unworkable state-run program was abandoned after 2 years, and house prices have skyrocketed faster than before. A promised light rail connection from Auckland's central business district to the airport met the same fate. The project was scrapped before it even started. Child poverty also rose under Ardern's leadership, as did carbon emissions. The so-called well-being budget earmarked funds to fix mental health, but has still not found any projects on which to spend the money. Even in the two major crises, actual policy implementation differed immensely from the PR-shaped perception. A gun buyback scheme after the Christchurch attack was a costly fiasco, and the country's success against COVID-19 was more a result of geography than policy. The government failed to manage even basic quarantine facilities. In the 2020 election campaign, Ardern should have struggled to explain why her grand promises had so utterly failed. Except no one demanded any accountability, and Ardern cruised to an absolute majority based on her saintly image. Ordinary Kiwis, unused to being the global center of attention, also desperately want this internationalist narrative to be true. Well, I have an explanation why Ardern won such a smashing victory for re-election and why she is not held accountable. It is because she is a woman. And women are wont to say, after failures, ill-planned failures, after foolishness, my intentions were good. And anyone who has ever dealt with a woman knows that to say my intentions were good, that is simply not sufficient, is in for grief. Now, I say women, Jacinda Ardern is a woman. Yes, she's a biological woman, but if you look at the biological men who lead so many of the world's countries, they are, how shall I put it, emotionally female as well. And what is Justin Trudeau's response to every failure of his two administrations? But my intentions were good. And if someone dares to say, no, that is not sufficient, then the media, which is dominated by women, biological or otherwise, rush to his defense. Don't you know how much Justin Trudeau has suffered because of all of this? How dare you attack his sincerity? Well, sincerity isn't the issue. It's not important. Anyone can be sincere. We're looking for results. And well, as we learned yesterday, apparently COVID-19, I don't know, was it perhaps dreamed up to persecute women in particular? Because that's the new line. Someone called Liz Lenz, and Liz is spelled with a Y, so very zany, who I've come across this woman and her fatuity before, but I can't at this moment recall exactly in what circumstances. She has a book called Belabored, A Vindication of the Rights of Pregnant Women. And there is a blurb by Jessica Valenti, who is one of the worst people in America. Liz Lenz is brilliant, and if you haven't ordered her book yet, what are you even doing with your life? So Liz, with a Y, has a piece on Substack. The pandemic is breaking women, and now we have to have babies. Go to hell. Women like Liz, I don't know whether they thought this way before The Handmaid's Tale, but so many of them in the media elite seem to suffer under the illusion that men are desperate to see them impregnated. And this is not the case. It's not the case. Be fruitful and multiply. God commanded us in the book of Genesis. I don't know, as far as Liz and her ilk go, I'm prepared to give them a pass. She writes, birth rates in the United States were already declining when the pandemic pulled the rug out from under our wobbly-legged society. That's an odd metaphor and not a successful one. So I talked about the statistics yesterday. I won't repeat them again. Women, America's only real social safety net, have broken. I suspect Liz was broken long before COVID-19. The declining birth rate in conjunction with the devastating loss of life of the pandemic will further erode America's social safety net. After all, who's going to pay in Social Security if we don't have a tax base? But it's exactly that lack of a social safety net that means women do not want to have children, because it's all about economics. That's just why women have had children in the past, just economics. I don't know. I have known a number of women who have had children and have taken a great deal of pleasure in them. I know it sounds crazy, and they've taken pleasure in them despite the financial sacrifices that have been required. But perhaps we've moved on. Let me spell it out for you clearly. Liz with a Y writes, the gender pay gap is real, not for women with college educations. It isn't, Liz, and I'm sure you know that. And it's worse for women of color. Women who take time off from work for children find themselves at even more of a loss of income. Well, yes, actually, and there's a reason for that. That women who are not going to be at work, 12 months of the year, minus vacations, who interrupt their work, say on a regular, semi-regular basis for months at a time, are not going to be regarded as highly at workplaces than those who don't. this is fairly obvious, and it should be even to Liz with a Y. America also has the worst maternal mortality rate among developed nations because of a deep institutional bias and a lack of standardized protocols. And this was before the pandemic. Now, with no schools, no daycare, no social support, and probably no job, since this woman is hurting women specifically, yeah, it's hurting men specifically as well. That's what the word specifically means. I think she meant to say especially so. Plus all of this stress and living in a house with a partner who statistically isn't doing his share of the housework or Zoom school. Now women are supposed to just suddenly feel in the mood to have babies because America's tax base is eroding. Go to hell. Go specifically to that hell that American women live in. Do American women live in hell compared to, say, women in, I don't know, Tanzania or Ecuador? Really? Where year after year we have to watch the theater of American politics debate our right to access medically necessary health care and create laws for our bodies based not on science but on a need for control. No, this is how it works, Liz. A woman has sex with a man, other things being equal, there's a 25% chance of the woman becoming pregnant. It has always been this way. But people like Liz with a Y have managed to persuade themselves that women giving birth to children is the result and has always been the result of the desire of men to exert control, that they have severed the link between sexual intercourse and procreation. They can't even accept that link on an intellectual level. Absolutely remarkable. And and you want us to give you babies. I don't know whether Liz with a Y has any babies, but women of her ilk. Oh, how long before we heard about their learning disabilities or their allergies or their asthma or the fact that they are non-binary or they are neurologically divergent? No one wants you knocked up, Liz. But I suppose it makes her feel better or feel worse. In her case, it's pretty much the same, that she actually believes this. I'm going to be talking about women again and bras and whales in just a minute. But first, let us go to the chat. What's the worst Scorsese movie, says Popcasso 88. I've never seen his blasphemous movie about Jesus Christ. So the worst for me, because I know what's in it. I know exactly what's in it. And it portrays Jesus Christ as a pissed off jerk. So that would be the worst as far as I'm concerned, but perhaps not for purely cinematic reasons. Of course, he makes a movie about the Dalai Lama, who treats the Dalai Lama as a living saint. Kundan, it's called. It's quite a good movie, I think. It's certainly a very powerful anti-immigration message. Okay, what are the latest comments here? Come on, scroll down. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, says Chokokin 666. Well, thank you for that, because I have noticed that women are fond of that expression. As C.S. Lewis pointed out, it is exactly the opposite of the truth, because the road to hell is paved with bad intentions. Hello, Professor Paul. Wales or Wales? No, Wales, the country. Head McNeck, I'm not going to debate your point about the Talmud. I understand what you're talking about. I have written about it, in fact. Coming up on the book club. Oh, boomers. Yes, Matthew Gubbins. I am going to be reviewing Helen Andrews' book, The Boomers. Boomers, it's called. Wearing masks outdoors is stupid, says Alex DeLarge. Does KMG contend that masks are not useful in any environment? Well, I'll mention something that Alex Berenson discovered, a couple of months ago, that there was a legal action in the province of Ontario in Canada. There was a flu epidemic, and nurses had been ordered to wear masks, and they said masks are not efficacious in this regard. And this went to an industrial tribunal, and experts were called forth to testify, and the nurses won their case. They were not required to wear masks. Her voice is like nails on the blackboard. Whose voice is that, by the way? Union workers pressing management to fire a union brother because he quoted someone else saying the N-word. This is the left. Yeah, it is the left. I wish that McNeil had not apologized. He'd simply not apologized. I would like to know more about exactly, these Americans were going to Peru, being chaperoned by Donald McNeil and others. What was the purpose of this? Who were the people who went? I got a pretty good idea of the nature of the people they went, their demography and their class, but never mind. Neil Terry says, KMG, I just wanted to say that Music Monday and the dive into Burnham are both A+ stuff. Thank you. Why, thank you. Too kind. So let's talk about the difficulty of buying bras in Wales. This is from walesonline.co.uk by Joel Lever. Tesco is a company, you could call it a supermarket, but it sells, everything, doesn't it? Armando Iannucci had a joke, more than a decade ago, that Tesco had, in the future, I believe around 2035, Tesco was actually invading countries. They invade and conquer Denmark. And it's noted that Tesco had changed their slogan from "every little helps" to "we control every aspect of your daily lives." But in any event, Tesco told a customer who said she was desperate for a new bra for work, it had been told it could not sell these items while Wales was in lockdown. For weeks now, supermarkets in Wales have only been able to sell essential items. These include food, sanitary products, baby items, pharmaceutical goods, toiletries, and personal care items. Oh, do we want to break that down? Are cookies, say, really an essential item? I don't have anything against cookies. Toiletries. Oh, I say, is Axe body spray? Is that truly an essential purpose? I would think that for a woman, a bra is certainly more essential than perfume. But in any event, the Welsh government has, however, banned the sale of certain products, including clothing and toys, because people don't need clothing. The rules mean people in specific circumstances continue to find themselves in difficult situations. One customer asked Tesco if she could buy a new bra. North Wales Live reports, tweeting, "Wales has stopped people from buying clothes from your stores, but I'm in desperate need for a new bra for work. Am I allowed to purchase a set?" The supermarket responded on Twitter this morning by saying it had been told not to sell these items. However, it went on to explain that the customer could put forward a case at their local store to be exempted from the restrictions. Tesco or any retailer in a similar situation could earn an enormous amount of goodwill by saying, if a woman comes to one of any of our stores and wants to buy a bra, we're going to sell her one. And if the government wants to come after us for this, so be it. Tesco said, "We understand how frustrating these changes are for our Welsh customers. However, we've been told by the Welsh government not to sell these items for the duration of the lockdown. It would be a case of popping into your local Tesco store and seeing if my colleagues are able to help. I don't know. Couldn't you give them some guidance? Although the current restrictions ban the general sale of non-essential items such as clothing and electrical goods, the Welsh government's guidance states that there are exceptions to this rule and that supermarket customers may still be able to buy banned items during lockdown if they are needed in an emergency or on compassionate grounds. Level to which governments are now in our business, controlling every aspect of our daily lives. Ask yourself the question, could you have imagined, 13 months ago, that any government in the Western world would make it difficult, if not impossible, for a woman to buy a bra? No. That just sounds like a paranoid right-wing fantasy, doesn't it? But paranoid right-wing fantasies have a troubling habit of becoming true. And this is again from Wales Online. Health Secretary for England, Matt Hancock, has unveiled tough new laws for anyone who wants to come into the UK, including the potential for people to be jailed for up to 10 years. Oh, I see. Those people who were coming across in boats from France, those people who were smuggling themselves into trucks and the like, illegal immigrants, were they being jailed for up to 10 years? I don't think so. Hancock, speaking in the House of Commons on Tuesday, said he made no apologies for how tough the new punishments will be. He said people lying about where they had been when coming to the UK in a bid to avoid hotel quarantine could be jailed for up to 10 years. And again, these illegal immigrants who routinely lie about where they are from, was there any suggestion that they were going to be jailed for up to 10 years? People refusing to quarantine on arrival for one of the red list countries can be fined between £5,000 and £10,000. And more penalties. So, okay. Oh, yes. And of course, COVID-19 is an intersectional question, as all questions are nowadays. This is from RT. Vaccine hesitancy among UK minorities forces COVID-19 inoculation center to close early 3 days last week. And this is a very interesting situation because, we're going to force people to get vaccines? Governments haven't said that yet, but it appears either they will force people to get vaccines, to do anything, perhaps even to leave their homes, and employers are going to require it. But when non-white people say they don't want the vaccine, are they going to be forced? And if they can get away with it, why can't the rest of us get away with it? A COVID-19 vaccination center in East London was forced to close its doors early 3 days last week, despite the center catering for patients registered at 40 doctor's surgeries, the Times has reported. Really low patient uptake at the John Scott Vaccination Center in Hackney, East London, has led the center to reduce its opening hours, intensifying fears that COVID-19 will spread among BAME groups like wildfire when lockdown restrictions are relaxed. BAME, Black, Asian, Middle Eastern. That's an acronym for those groups. Volunteers were informed last week that an alarming shortage of willing recipients for the jab would see the center's hours cut. Really low patient uptake. Again, none of us want to do this, but we feel to open a clinic as a massively underutilized resource will not be helpful to anyone. All booked patients to date will be vaccinated. On Sunday, the vaccines minister, yes, and Britain has a minister for vaccines. Apparently, they have a health minister, but he can't take care of health and vaccines. That would be too much. Nadeem Sahawi said he was very concerned by figures that suggested white people were twice as likely as black people to have been vaccinated so far. Okay. We have a situation in Britain, the same situation in the United States as in Canada, where, the government tells us, well, of course, non-white people are far more suspicious of the government, of the authorities, of the police than white people. And now they have really led themselves into a corner here. Because if it is legitimate for non-white people to be very suspicious of authorities and their intentions, how would it be illegitimate in this case? And I will add, particularly when we consider the evidence regarding these vaccines, their safety and their efficacy. The news reinforces a number of studies that suggested BAME citizens were less likely to step forward to get a COVID-19 jab. According to the 2011 census, 45% of the residents of Hackney were considered non-white. I'd say it's probably closer to 60 or 65% now. Research from the UK Household Longitudinal Study, which involved over 12,000 participants, suggested that 82% of the UK population was willing to take the jab. However, the researchers claim that 72% of Black people said they were unlikely to have the jab. Well, I don't know. Maybe it is the racial minorities that are going to save the rest of us from mandatory inoculation. Lockdown skeptics, Jonathan Barr. New plot twists mean lockdown could be renewed for another season. Official figures continue to show falling numbers of COVID cases and deaths. There were 333 COVID deaths announced yesterday, the lowest 24-hour toll since December the 27th, and a drop of 18% on the 406 last Monday. Any optimism, however, is to be kept firmly in check by the vaccine-resistant South African variant. The Telegraph has more, specifically that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine may be only 10% effective against the new South African variant. It has emerged as experts warn that 147 UK cases could be the tip of the iceberg. Matt Hancock hosted yet another Downing Street press conference in which he was joined by Deputy Chief Medical Officer Professor Jonathan Van Tam and NHS England's Medical Director for Primary Care, Dr. Nikki Kanani. While he offered a positive update on the rollout of vaccines and said, "We're turning a corner," Hancock made it clear that the new variants mean this won't be over any time soon. The Spectator's Katie Ball sums up the overall message of the conference as "Don't panic." The conference did not offer much in the way of substantial comment on the pathway out of lockdown restrictions, merely a warning against ambitious summer holiday plans. Naturally, it was the danger presented by the new variant which dominated the reporting. Prompted by a BBC News report, one of our readers has this question. In case you thought there might be cautious grounds for optimism that we might be gradually heaving our way towards the end of the crisis, the BBC was on hand yesterday to dash any hopes. The 1800 news on Radio 4 began with Boris Johnson's optimism about vaccines, but that mood couldn't last. The science correspondent, David Schuckman, banged out a piece about the dangerous prospect of mutated variants racing ahead of vaccines, helped by countries that won't be vaccinating until well into next year, and by difficulties in getting other countries up to speed with genome analysis. That's all theoretically true, of course, but it's been true of all viruses since forever, so it wasn't exactly a revelation. However, the real purpose seems to have been to inject a mood of complete pessimism and despair. In one sentence, Schuckman managed to undermine completely the vaccine message by suggesting that they're never going to catch up. Of course, he could have pointed out either that the vaccines might work or that the virus might mutate into a contagious but relatively harmless form, which are equally possible. But that would be to miss the chance to be an apocalyptic doom-monger, wouldn't it? Good old BBC. The risk of eternal lockdown, with again from lockdown skeptics, with ongoing nervousness about relaxing restrictions exacerbated by concerns over the new variants. Adam Wagner, a barrister at Doughty Street Chambers and an authority on lockdown rules, has written an article for Unheard, warning against the danger of everlasting lockdown. He begins by reminding us just what a momentous thing lockdown is. 12 months ago, the first two cases of COVID-19 were confirmed in the UK. 50 days later, on March 23rd, the Prime Minister announced that he would, quote, give the people a very simple instruction: you must stay home, unquote. 3 days after that, the first set of emergency lockdown regulations arrived. They were undoubtedly the most severe restrictions on liberty imposed in peacetime, and Health Secretary Matt Hancock reportedly described them as Napoleonic. In lockdown, he told the cabinet, in a reversal of the usual principle of English law, that whatever is not explicitly prohibited is permitted, quote, people would be forbidden from doing anything unless the legislation said in terms that they could, unquote. It is extraordinary that restrictions which a judge described as possibly the most restrictive regime on the public life of persons and businesses ever could be made without prior parliamentary scrutiny. But it took just 11 pages of law and one signature for Matt Hancock to impose the March 24th lockdown, which came into effect the moment he put down the pen. Those 11 pages closed all non-essential businesses, meaning that people could only leave their homes if they had a reasonable excuse, and largely banned gatherings between people not of the same household. Any breaches could be punished. The police were also given power to take such action as is necessary to break up gatherings or ensure business closed. I'm going to say that it's all very well to talk about lockdowns forever, but there can't be lockdowns forever because the economy will have collapsed utterly long before that point. Our leaders don't seem to have any understanding of this, particularly in my country of Canada. We'll just borrow more money and more money and more money still. We're not the United States. We don't have a money printer that goes, no. So our situation is a lot different, aside from the fact that the provinces in British Columbia are broke too. But there's no end in sight to this. And one day the system will just stop. It will just stop. Wagner asks if lockdowns can be justified and finds it hard to answer. Even if some of the restrictions are proportionate, he says they cannot become permanent for three key reasons. First, some lockdown measures work, but they have serious knock-on effects, including a shrinking economy, which itself causes higher mortality, delayed cancer treatment, and surgery. The move to online education has most severely affected those from lower socioeconomic groups. While this doesn't negate the need for restrictions, it illustrates how damaging they can be and why they must only be used for as long as necessary and no longer. Second, the method by which lockdown has been imposed in England borders on anti-democratic. There may have been justification in March for using emergency procedures to bypass Parliament, but there has not been since. The most severe legal restrictions on liberty require the gold standard of democratic accountability, not a rushed procedure which sidelines Parliament. This has likely led to illiberal outcomes, for example, the explicit allowance for protest being removed in early December, meaning it is unclear whether socially distanced outdoor protests are a criminal offense or not. Third, the lockdown laws themselves have become overly complex, poorly communicated, and almost impossible for a non-lawyer, including the police, to digest. Guidance and law have become elided by both politicians and public, leading to wrongful enforcement and widespread confusion. Then there are the exceptions. On one level, it is positive that exceptions have been added to allow for the many vicissitudes of human life, but they have been at the expense of simplicity. He concludes, hard questions will need to be asked as to what to do next and will require a rights-based approach to resolve. It is essential that we don't enter a semi-permanent state of emergency laws and basic rights switched on and off by the government at will and without democratic scrutiny. Lockdowns may have been necessary, but we cannot be locked down forever. Now, this next item on lockdown skeptics, I hadn't thought of this aspect of it, and I'm going to have to do some investigation to see whether it applies to my country, which I suspect it does. The federal government, Justin Trudeau's government, bailed out the Canadian news media with $600 million. Was it a year ago or so? Apart from the fact that CBC is owned by the federal government. So what does this mean? Well, in practice, it means that the media is going to support the government, because the argument that they had made was that without government support, we will go under. I'd already mentioned that for quite some time now, the media on the whole has seen their job is to lightly rewrite government press releases. But specifically in Britain, The Conservative Woman has a must-read piece by writer Frederick Edward on the dramatic change that has taken place within the advertising industry over the past year. First, it tells of the shrinking trade that newspaper advertising is getting from the companies that were its biggest customers. For 2020, down 14.5%, the ad spend, a decline of £3.6 billion. Some areas of advertising have witnessed complete destruction. The UK's top advertisers, led by McDonald's and Procter & Gamble, have slashed their budgets. Why put adverts on the telly when your outlets are closed? A report from August states that McDonald's year-on-year advertising had fallen by 97%. Even Amazon's fell by 77% and Sky's by 60%. Entertainment and leisure were down £207 million and travel and transport down £138 million. Such reductions had a dramatic impact on companies reliant on them for their advertising revenue, namely newspapers. The Daily Mail and General Trust reported an advertising revenue fall of around 25% between September 2019 and September 2020. Fortunately for the industry, there is one customer that has stepped in and kept the industry afloat. Until 2020, the government was not a major advertiser in newspapers. But all that has changed during the pandemic when the government became the nation's largest advertiser across all media. Between March 23rd and June 30th of 2020, Public Health England's advertising spend increased by 5,000% year on year. Though less than a quarter of the government's total outlay for COVID-19 information and communication, the spending has proved significant enough for the newspaper to hail this continued COVID advice blitz as vital for its revival in 2021. This market shift is not without its consequences. The fourth estate is supposed to hold the government to account. It should be the newspaper's responsibility to scrutinize the unprecedented state actions taken in response to the pandemic under the emergency powers of the Coronavirus Act, now twice extended and bringing about the greatest loss of liberty in our country's history. As Laura Perrins pointed out last week, the media rarely ask any tough questions. Pretty much every question they put is, why didn't you lock down earlier? And why didn't you lock down harder? Why didn't you enact more draconian measures sooner? That's certainly been the case in Canada, and it's certainly been the case in the United States. And Canadian journalists are actually driving out to churches. Normally they would shrink from a church as a vampire from garlic, but they'd heard reports that apparently churches, evangelical churches for the most part, had too many people in them. And upon confirming this, they shopped them to the police. Because journalism, it's pretty much an adjunct now to law enforcement, or certainly narrative enforcement. Is it not? It's their job to shut down people who are saying the wrong things and to have people arrested for saying the wrong things, or certainly to ruin their lives. And I'm going to talk about Alex Berenson again. And I've said this before, but it bears repeating, that I know of no other journalist, and this is just one man on Twitter, and this is not his daily occupation. He is a novelist by trade. He is providing more evidence as to the efficacy and safety of vaccines than the rest of the media put together. And you might want to ask, why is this so? He has a new novel coming out called The Power Couple. And he writes, so multiple interviewers have asked if I'm surprised that Simon & Schuster didn't dump The Power Couple because of my views on lockdowns and masks. To be clear, SNS has supported the novel, but the fact people would seriously raise the issue reveals how bad cancel culture has become. Remember, this is a novel. It has nothing to do with COVID, and I wrote it in 2018 and 2019. But elite media attacks on anyone who disputes the preferred narratives on COVID or anything else are now so fierce that even fiction apparently may be at risk. One more point. The Power Couple is my first non-John Wells novel. All the Wells novels were bestsellers. And the fact that TPC is coming out as I've become known, for better or worse, for my stance on COVID, would under normal circumstances be a pretty interesting story. The kind of thing that I would expect to get a little bit of attention, a profile here, a review there, not necessarily positive attention, but notice. Nope, nothing. Since they can't cancel me or my novel, the elite media has simply decided to ignore me and the book. And let's see. Oh, yes. There's a headline from Reuters. More than 97% of recent COVID deaths in Israel were people who weren't vaccinated. Prime Minister Netanyahu says. Berenson comments, this is a lie, as his own government's figures prove. He appears to be defining vaccinated as at least a week after getting 2 doses, a category that includes only a few days for most people in it. In truth, about 550 Israelis have died after getting at least 1 vaccine dose. He follows up, the vaccine campaign has collapsed in Israel. Israelis are not anti-vaccine. Up to 98% get normal childhood vaccines. But they know the COVID vaccines are different, and they are smart enough to wonder why their epidemic won't end almost 2 months into mass vaccinations. The story here linked the Times of Israel. As demand for vaccines plummets, Israel may resort to incentive programs. And finally, from Berenson, when critics look back at Pandemia and debate when the show jumped the shark, I think the 2 Mask episode will really stand out, especially on the heels of the Christmas special. You can only sneer at your audience for so long. Attention citizens, your Department of Pandemia is proud to announce our new campaign, The Light at the End of the Tunnel, 100 Days of Anal Swabs. Spread your cheeks to stop the spread. Just bend over and take it. Your nation will thank you. Attention citizens. And I'm going to go back to James Burnham's The Machiavellians, and particularly the ruling class as defined by Gaetano Mosca, and specifically the best and worst governments. Mosca, like Machiavelli, does not stop with the descriptive analysis of political life. He states plainly his own preferences, his opinions about what types of governments are best, what worst. Naturally, as is the case with all Machiavellians, his goal is not anything supernatural or utopian. To be the best, a government must first of all be possible. He does no dreaming about a perfect state or absolute justice. In fact, Mosca suggests what I had occasion to mention in connection with Dante, namely that political doctrines which promise utopias and absolute justice are very likely to lead to much worse social effects than doctrines less entrancing in appearance, that utopian programs may be even the most convenient of cloaks for those whose real aims are most rightly suspect. The impossibility of attaining absolute justice, however, does not render useless an effort after what measure of approximate justice is possible in the actual social world that we inhabit. Well, if Mosca is true, we are in grave, even existential difficulty here. That political doctrines which promise utopias and absolute justice are very likely to lead to much more worse social effects than doctrines less entrancing in appearance. Okay, we're going to completely eliminate COVID-19 and its variants. This is utopian. We are going to completely eliminate white supremacy, whatever that might be, and systemic racism, whatever that might be. We are going to continue on our campaign to eliminate all distinctions between men and women. And we're going to pull down our energy system and replace it pretty quickly with a system that we don't even know can work to scale. So we have all of these utopian schemes being pressed furiously by our governments at the same time. And to me, that spells disaster, and sooner rather than later. Mosca writes, human sentiments being what they are, to set out to erect a type of political organization that will correspond in all respects to the ideal of justice, which a man can conceive but can never attain, is a utopia. And the utopia becomes frankly dangerous when it succeeds in bringing a large mass of intellectual and moral energies to bear upon the achievement of an end that will never be achieved, and that, on the day of its purported achievement, can mean nothing more than triumph for the worst people and distress and disappointment for the good. Burke remarked more than a century ago that any political system that assumes the existence of superhuman or heroic virtues can result only in vice and corruption. But even if there is never to be an absolute justice in this world until humanity comes really to be molded to the image and likeness of God, there has been, there is, and there will be always a relative justice in society in societies that are fairly well organized. There will always be, in other words, a sum of laws, habits, norms, all varying according to times and peoples, which are laid down and enforced by public opinion and in accordance with what we have called the struggle for preeminence. The effort of every individual to better and to conserve his own position will be regulated. Burnham comments, again, following Machiavelli, the dominant element in Mosca's conception of that relative justice, which he thinks possible as well as desirable, is liberty. The meaning of liberty he makes more precise by defining it in terms of what he calls juridical defense. Quote, the social mechanisms that regulate this disciplining of the moral sense constitute what we call juridical defense, respect for law, government by law. It will be further noted that our view is contrary to the doctrine of Rousseau, that man is good by nature, but society makes him wicked and perverse. We believe that social organization provides for the reciprocal restraint of human individuals by one another, and so makes them better, not by destroying their wicked instincts, but by accustoming them to controlling their wicked instincts. Guicciardini defines political liberty as a prevalence of law and public decrees over the appetites of particular men. If we take particular men in the sense of individuals, meaning single individuals, and including individuals who have power in their hands, it would be difficult to find a more rigorously scientific definition. A corrupt government, in which the person who commands makes his will licit in the law, whether in the name of God or in the name of the people does not matter, will obviously be inadequate to fulfilling its mission to regard to juridical defense. The freest country is the country where the rights of the governed are best protected against arbitrary caprice and tyranny on the part of rulers. And we are obviously nowhere near that position now, because we are ruled absolutely by arbitrary caprice and tyranny on the part of our rulers. And who are these rulers? Public health bureaucrats. Burnham comments, juridical defense then means government by law and due process, not merely formally in the words of constitutions or statutes, but in fact. It means a set of impersonal restrictions on those who hold power, and correlatively a set of protections for the individuals against the state and those who have power. The specific forms of juridical defense include the familiar democratic rights. Quote, in countries that have so far rightly been reputed free, private property cannot be violated arbitrarily. A citizen cannot be arrested and condemned unless specified rules are observed. Each person can follow the religion of his choice without forfeiture of his civil and political rights. The press cannot be subjected to censorship and is free to discuss and criticize acts of government. You will notice that in Britain now, post-COVID, none of those exist anymore. None. Facebook decides that if you say things that they don't like about masks, they're going to shut down your account. Or if you say things they don't like about vaccines, they're going to shut down your account. Of all these rights, Mosca considers the right of public discussion of free speech, as we usually call it, the most important and the strongest foundation of juridical defense as a whole. A firm juridical defense is required for the attainment and maintenance of a relatively high level of civilization, which is measured, according to Mosca's definition, by the degree of development and number of social forces. That is, the more social forces there are and the more fully each is developed, the higher the level of a given civilization. A civilization that has an active art, an active literature, and commerce and science and industry, a strong army, and a progressive agriculture is higher than one that concentrates on only one or two of these, or one that is mediocre in most or all of them. Thus, the conception of level of civilization can serve as a rough standard for evaluating different cultures. But what is it that makes possible a high level of juridical defense and of civilization? With the answer to this question, we come to what is perhaps the most profound and most important of all Mosca's ideas, though it also has its source in Machiavelli. Mosca's answer, moreover, is sharply at variance with many accepted theories, and particularly opposed to the arguments of almost all the spokesmen of the ruling class. The mere formal structure of laws and constitutions or of institutional arrangements cannot guarantee juridical defense. Constitutions and laws, as we certainly should know by now, need have no relation to what happens. Hitler never repealed the Weimar Constitution, and Stalin ordered the adoption of, quote, the most democratic constitution in the history of the world, unquote. Nor can the most formally perfect organizational setup, one house or two or three house legislatures, independent or responsible executives, kings or presidents, written or unwritten constitutions, judges appointed or elected, decisions on these formalities will never settle the problem, nor will any doctrine nor any reliance on the goodwill of whatever men give a guarantee. The men who want and are able to get power never have the necessary kind of goodwill, but always seek for themselves and their group still more power. In real social life, only power can control power. I think this gets to the heart of the Machiavellian worldview, that, oh no, we don't need opposing forces in society because the people who are in charge, well, they're good people and they're smart people and they're hardworking people. Are they? Are they now? Even if they were, where there is no opposing power that is allowed, this leads to tyranny. Because the people who have power are always seeking more power. They're looking to extend and reinforce their hegemony. Burnham continues, juridical defense can be secure only where there are at work various and opposing tendencies and forces, and where these mutually check and restrain each other. Tyranny, the worst of all governments, means the loss of juridical defense, and juridical defense inevitably disappears whenever one tendency or force in society succeeds in absorbing or suppressing all the others. Those who control the supreme force rule then without restraint. The individual has no protection against them. From one point of view, the protective balance must be established between the autocratic and liberal principles and between the aristocratic and democratic tendencies. Monopoly by the aristocratic tendency produces a closed and inflexible caste system and fossilization. The extreme of democracy brings an unbridled anarchy under which the whole social order flies to pieces. More fundamentally, there must be an approximate balance among the major social forces, or at least a shifting equilibrium in which no one of these forces can overpower all the rest. Mosca writes, even granted that such a world, the world of so many utopians where conflicts and rivalries among different forces, religions, and parties will have ended, could be realized, it does not seem to us a desirable sort of world. So far in history, freedom to think, to observe, to judge men and things serenely and dispassionately has been possible. Always, be it understood for a few individuals, only in those societies in which numbers of different religious and political currents have been struggling for dominion. The same condition is almost indispensable for the attainment of what is commonly called political liberty. In other words, the highest possible degree of justice in the relations between governors and governed that is compatible with our imperfect human nature. History teaches that whenever, in the course of the ages, a social organization has exerted such an influence to raise the level of civilization in a beneficial way, it has done so because the individual and collective will of the men who have held power in their hands has been curbed and balanced by other men who have occupied positions of absolute independence and have had no common interests with those whom they have had to curb and balance. It has been necessary, nay, indispensable, that there should be a multiplicity of political forces, that there should be many different roads by which social importance could be acquired. I would list as an example of that England of the Middle Ages. Before Henry VIII became the king, in the England of that time, you had three powerful social forces. You had the monarchy, you had the aristocracy, and you had the church. And not one of them was powerful enough on its own to shove the others aside. When Henry VIII became king, He instituted a savage theocracy, which thrust the aristocracy to one side. In effect, the old aristocracy was destroyed, and a new aristocracy of pliant cronies was created. And of course, the aristocrats' property was divvied up against these new men, and the church was shunted aside. In fact, the church was banned in England. And of course, its property were assumed by the king and his new class of pliant cronies. Freedom, Burnham continues, in the world as it is thus the product of conflict and difference, not of unity and harmony. Again, this is crucial. All of these people talking about unity and harmony, as we see in the Biden administration, what they're saying is we are in charge. And by in charge, we mean we decide everything. We decide even the level of opposition which is allowed, which is currently near zero. In these terms, we see again the danger of idealism, utopianism, and demagogy. The idealists, utopians, and demagogues always tell us that justice in the good society will be achieved by the absolute triumph of their doctrine and their side. The facts show us that the absolute triumph of any side and any doctrine whatsoever can only mean tyranny. Mosca writes, the absolute preponderance of a single political force, the predominance of any oversimplified concept in the organization of the state, the strictly logical application of any single principle in all public law are the essential elements in any type of despotism, whether it be a despotism based upon divine right or a despotism based ostensibly on popular sovereignty. For they enable anyone who is in power to exploit the advantages of a superior position more thoroughly for the benefit of his own interests and passions. When the leaders of a governing class are the exclusive interpreters of the will of God or the will of the people and exercise sovereignty in the name of those abstractions in society that are deeply imbued with religious beliefs or with democratic fanaticism, and when no other organized social forces exist apart from those which represent the principle on which sovereignty over the nation is based, then there can be no resistance, no effective control to restrain a natural tendency in those who stand at the head of a social order to abuse their power. And I'll have more on this subject of best and worst governments tomorrow. But I wanted to end up with a story from Canada. I suppose perhaps Canadians are a little jealous of this young black woman in the United States who has just rocketed to fame after her speech at the inaugural. And then, of course, her message to saluting the captains, the warriors of the fight against COVID-19. This is from the Globe and Mail yesterday. Louise Bernice Half is the type of person who remembers simple acts of kindness, such as the grade 2 teacher who sent home a bag of high-heeled shoes for her mother, even though she and her family lived in a log shack in the bush. Ms. Half, who was given a Cree name by an elder that loosely translates to sky dancer in English, also remembers the Coke she was offered by a stranger who spotted her in a hotel lobby when she was a child, a gesture that followed a painful incident with family that saw Half running to try to report violence to police. Half, a residential school survivor, that's what they're called now, and this is mandatory, they're survivors, is sharing her journey as she takes on her new role as Canada's Parliamentary Poet Laureate. One might expect that a poet laureate would thought to be particularly good with words. No. Now, a poet laureate of any kind or acclaimed poet is acclaimed for what? Having suffered in the past. And I suppose because of a need to keep this suffering foremost in the mind and to elaborate on it at all times. Let's see. The speakers of the Senate and House of Commons announced her appointment last week, making her the 9th poet to serve in the position. I will point out a position that I had never heard of. And I follow Canadian politics more closely than, I don't know, about 98% of the people who live here. And I should think that fewer than 1 in 1,000 or 10,000 Canadians had ever heard or even knew that Canada had a parliamentary poet laureate. Half said she is excited and hopeful about taking on the job, including being able to spotlight other Indigenous writers across the country. She's been recognized for incorporating Cree language and teachings into her work, which includes the poetry collections Bare Bones and Feathers, Blue Marrow, The Crooked Good, Burning in This Midnight Dream, something that I can't possibly pronounce because of all the diacritical marks. Her latest book, Oasis, and again, diacritical marks, Kinky and Disheveled, is due to be published this spirit by Ontario Press, Rick Brooks. Poetry in Canada has been for decades paid for by governments, federal and provincial. There's a run of these books. To the extent that they're bought and simply not pulped, they are bought by university libraries. Nobody reads them. Nobody. In fact, I was friendly for quite a few years with a bookseller in Vancouver, Bill Hoffer. Fascinating man. A very difficult man, I must say, rather ferocious. But he had cornered the market on these small print books that university libraries were desperate to complete their collections, and they had to go through him, and they had to pay through the nose for these books. Bill Hoffer hated Canadian literature with a passion. I may have mentioned this before, but I remember he used to produce these catalogs, and they would have an illustration on the cover, and one was called New Titles, and it was a picture of mutts at the pound, and another one was called Waiting for Business, and it was a picture of Parisian prostitutes on the streets in the 1940s. We see that Half has previously served as Saskatchewan's poet laureate. She is a survivor of the Blue Quills residential school, an experience that she says left her without a sense of heritage and prompted her to face key questions, including what her purpose in life would be. Through the help of therapists and elders in her community, she says she was able to find out who the heck Louise Bernice Half was. I think I've come a long way. She said, I'm curious about life. I love to read. I love to investigate people's thoughts and reactions, and it doesn't matter what age group they're from. I'm just curious. How do you survive? How do you do it? How do you live? What does any of this have to do with poetry, which is a complicated art, much more complicated than, say, writing novels. Yes, let's see. Louise Bernice Half is a skilled and innovative poet and writer whose work has contributed an incredible amount to the growth and diversification of Canada's poetry landscape. Wow, that's what they call, this is from the League of Canadian Poets, that's what they call a backhanded compliment. Appointing her to the role of Canada's Poet Laureate is an honor to the role itself, a beautiful and symbolic step towards raising the stature of poetry and Indigenous poets in Canada. Okay. I mentioned these words that I cannot pronounce, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, and I will say that they are transliterations of Native Indian languages. Native Indians do not have a written language. They do not have written languages. It's a completely oral culture. Beginning, 30, 40 years ago, linguistics professors and the like at universities decided to create written languages for Native Indian tribes. And these are plastered everywhere on public buildings, on street signs and the like, as names of institutions, names of cities which had been known by other names for, over 100 years, 150 years. I would guess that fewer than 1 in 500 or 1,000 Native Indians in Canada understands any of these transliterations. But apparently we are stuck with them. And this woman, Louise Bernice Half, she is a leader in what is called code switching. And apparently this means using more than one language at a time in a sentence or a paragraph. There is an essay, many thousands of words in Wikipedia on that. I don't know. Apparently, code switching is transgressive in some way. And there is the obligatory reference in the Writers' Trust of Canada or some other official institution to Turtle Island. Yes, here we go. Here we go. Her work cannot be assimilated in the canon of contemporary Canadian literature. Oh, instead it must be ingested. Transforming our collective literature on a cellular level. Oh my. Reimagining our identities, languages, and memories as denizens of Turtle Island. This is from the 2007 Latiner Writers' Trust Poetry Prize jury, which comprised Alice Burdick, Soraya Peerbay, and Gregory Schofield. Turtle Island. I remember when I first heard this phrase used, I think back in the 1970s. Oh, so apparently what, Indians on the plains, as well as other places in North America, the Turtle Island, how would they possibly have any idea that North America is an island? It's not really, because there's the isthmus to Panama, but that technically, I suppose, one could regard North and South America together as an island. How on earth would anyone know this? They wouldn't. It's all made up. But we're all forced to believe it nonetheless. And of course, it's amusing, but it's also rather sad that Canada's media and our literary organizations go to such lengths in order to try to persuade us that someone such as Louise Bernice Half, I don't have anything against this woman, but I can tell you that the number of people who have probably actually read her work is less than 1,000 in the whole country. But that nonetheless, her work is so important, it must be ingested. We must understand it at a cellular level. Wow, I don't know that I've ever heard as grand a claim as that made for any other writer in the history of literature. Mr. Dissident says, cellular level reminds me of the pseudoscience verbiage a Herbalife saleswoman regurgitated to me years ago. Yes, it kind of reminds me of, when blenders, blenders have been popular for 50, 60 years or whatever. But when they began to get really popular about 20 years ago for health food people, and I recall a certain type of blender. No, our blender is different from all the others. How is your blender different? Isn't there's a container and there's blades at the bottom which revolve at various speeds? No. But our blender cuts the food in a new, different way so that the goodness of it, the medical goodness of it is unleashed. All these other blenders, no, they don't cut up the food that way. Only our blender does. And I thought, do they really expect anyone to believe that? But I guess a fair number of people did. Again, from Mr. Dissident, good thing rap and hip hop are free from any extremism, incitement, or hate. Ogan's Iron said there was some university prof who was handed a lot of funds to run black metal shows, put together events, and his official mission was to monitor extremism in black metal. Isn't the whole genre, I mean, just when you look at it in terms of sonority, isn't it extreme? Monitoring black metal. Yeah, isn't the problem with the people involved in black metal that they have this disturbing habit of killing each other and then eating each other, or does that only happen in Norway? HIV positive transgender says, I believe Canada also funds rappers. I recall a black rapper named Mayhem Moriarty who took $15K from the Canadian government and then proceeded to rob a jewelry store not long afterwards. Well, perhaps that was the nature of his art. Performance art. I mean, performance art. It says it's transgressive, but what could be more transgressive than armed robbery? Although that guy, what was his name? Chris Burden? The guy who cut himself up and what, crucified himself? I have to admit, that was genuinely transgressive. Media Hit says, well, the natives protesting these images have been on and off for a while, but it has been the Ben and Jemima removings that just happened fast after the riots. They didn't even stop for a second to think that nobody really cares. I never imagined that Uncle Ben and Aunt Jemima, even when I was a child, were accurate representations of, American blacks of what the 1960s say. But I looked at these friendly faces, fronting this delicious food, and I thought and continue to think, how would anyone think that these depictions hate black people? I mean, does anyone actually believe that? Really? Aunt Jay was as real a personage as Harriet Tubman. Her only demerit was that she was a fierce advocate of gluten. Oh, Aunt Jemima, I see. Okay. Did you see that movie, 12 Years a Slave? No. No, I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. I mean, the fact that a presentation like that is historically inaccurate, that itself doesn't bother me. But if the whole point of the presentation is to hammer home some historical truth, then the fact that it's got everything wrong means I'm not interested. Let's see. Oh, mascots. Media Hits. Mascots were always fun to make fun of, but really it must not have peeved anyone off. There really wouldn't be any boycotts. What I'm worried about is the Chicago Blackhawks, the hockey team, which has the most beautiful logo in sports. No question about it. And I fear that this is going to be lost as well. Enron says, I had the McRib a couple of times and hated it. Yeah, that thing always made me feel queasy. And of course, this question of what exactly is it that I'm eating? Again, from Enron, I've heard some McD workers say they have no idea what the ice cream there is made of and don't really want to know. Yeah, I've never been... I don't know. I mean, soft ice cream, that's for children, isn't it? I suppose there's a whole bunch of adults now who consider, hard ice cream to be too difficult for them. Oh, we're talking about Review Bra. Dr. Paul says, I think the whole point of Review Bra is to subject a traditional U.S. fast food to actual reviews and not dismiss them out of hand. McDonald's, after all, had the best fries once. Of course, they're not French fries, as typically understood. They are reconstituted potatoes. Although Julia, no less than Julia Child, said that when they're fresh from the boiler, then they are delicious. As I have found, the problem is that it doesn't take too many minutes after they have been cooked when they begin to resemble cardboard. Okay, that's the show for today. I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up on the show later this week, on Thursday, I'm going to be discussing Charlie Varick, directed by Don Siegel and starring Walter Matthau, and an excellent performance, Joe Don Baker. And on the book club, I am going to be discussing, let's see, what is it? It is Apathy for the Devil by Nick Kent, which is a memoir of 10 years in the rock criticism business in England and also in America in the 1970s. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you'd like to make a donation to this live stream, which please, if you could, I'd appreciate it so much. And my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can make a donation directly to me via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I shall leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.